Views are updatable only under certain conditions. The first condition is that the view has to have at least one table in the from clause. The idea here is that it's possible to create a view using a select statement that returns static data that's not read from any table. So that kind of view is not going to be updatable, which makes sense. There's no underlying table in that kind of a view that has updatable data. So you have to have at least one table in the from clause. The changes can affect only one table, no matter how many tables are joined in the view definition. There are various ways in Transact SQL to get around this limitation, but just straight using a view, the changes can only affect a single table, and I'll show you how that works. And then, columns based on expressions, set operators, or aggregate functions can't be updated. So this kind of makes sense too, because there's really no way for SQL Server to figure out how to break down the aggregated data, say, into its component parts to be able to tell how you're updating that value. And this limitation really is no different from updating table data directly. For example, you can't update a computed column within a table directly, even directly using an update statement. And then finally, columns can't be affected by group by, having, or distinct clauses. And the reason, again, is because these are aggregation types of operations that randomly select rows or hide individual rows. And once again, SQL Server has no way to know which rows you want to update that are part of that aggregated set of rows. Now, when you add or update rows through a view, they can disappear from the scope of the view if they no longer satisfy the criteria that's defined within the view. For example, let's say that a view is defined for salesperson equals Carol. That's the filter on the select statement that defines the view. And then you attempt to update the salesperson to Don. Then in that case, a requery of the view won't show the new order or the new data. And the same thing would happen if you attempted to insert an order for a salesperson that is not included within the results of that view. Okay, so the important issue here is that you have to be careful what kind of data you're attempting to update using the view. It has to correspond to the limitations, to the criteria of the view, and it can't change the rows that are included within the view. And again, that's the example of changing the salesperson from Carol to Don using the view itself. In those sort of cases, you would have to update the tables directly. And then there's various other considerations that you'll have to take into account when updating data, depending on the structure of the select statement that is used to define the view. And so what I'm going to do now is show you some examples of some code that explores some of these behaviors. One of the options you can use within a view definition is to force all data modification statements executed against the view to adhere to the criteria set within the view definition. So in order to implement that behavior, you would use the check option with check option clause here. Okay, so what this view does is it's basically just listing orders, but it's including this check option. So it's selecting order ID, order date, employee ID from orders where employee ID equals 5. All right, so I'll start by creating that view. And then I'll attempt to update the data that is returned by the view and set the employee ID equal to 6. And I'll execute that, and I get this error message. Show you the whole error message here. All right, so what this message says is that the attempted insert or update failed because the target view either specifies with check option, that's obviously the case here, or spans a view that specifies with check option, and one or more rows resulting from the operation did not qualify under the check option constraint. And it says the statement has been terminated, so the data was not updated. So the idea here is because the update statement would change the records returned by the view, those rows would no longer meet the criteria for the view. And with check option prevents that kind of a change. So you can start to see how you can use views to update data, but you can restrict the kind of operations that can be performed. So it's another way of protecting the data within the tables that are accessed using the view definition. Okay, so that shows how you can limit the changes made using a view. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the limitations. So here's a view definition that defines a view where the returns are updatable, but there's a computed address column that's read-only. All right, so customer addresses. It's going to select the customer ID, the contact name, and then the company name. Well, actually, it's going to define this address field here. So this is a computed column. It's putting out the company name, carriage return line feed, address, similar to the example where we formatted address labels in essence. So this is a computed column because it's not just directly returning the contents of a single column. All right, so I'll create this view. And do a select against it. Okay, so you can see the results. So I have this kind of formatted a little funky, but here's the customer ID, and then the contact name, and then the address. And this is just being carriage returned and returned over to the side here. So let me change this to results to grid again and execute that again. Makes it a little bit easier to see the results. Okay, so let's attempt to update the data returned by this view. In other words, update the data within the underlying table. So this update statement is going to update this view. So again, you can see that you write an update statement using a view the same way that you write an update statement using a table. So here's the contact name. If I scroll back up here, you can see that I'm returning the contact name as just a single field here. So that will work. And then I'm filtering on the records that I want to update. Okay, so remember that the contact name now is Howard Snyder. I'll execute this. So that's the update statement. That's succeeded. And now if I do a select on that view again, you can see that the contact name is Gomer Snyder. So once again, I've updated the data in the underlying table through the view rather than changing the table directly. But here's an example of an update statement that will fail. Once again, I'm updating the data through the view, but I'm attempting to update the value of that computed address field. This isn't a column within the table, it's a computed field within, that's defined within the view. So now when I attempt to execute this statement, it says update or insert a viewer function, view customer addresses, failed because it contains a derived or constant field. So I can't use that view in order to update that data. I can use the view to update individual fields returned by the view, but not the computed field. Okay, another issue is updating views that contain joins. In this case, you can only update the data in one table at a time. So here's a product by category view. It's selecting the category name, product ID, product name, so forth, from products, and has an inner join on categories. So fairly straightforward, using just a regular join statement. And I'll create the view. And I'll select from it so you can see what the code does. As you can see, we get 77 rows, and it's listing all the categories and the products within each category. Okay, so far, everything pretty simple and straightforward. But now what I want to do is attempt to use the view in order to update the underlying tables. So here's an update statement. It's going to update that view and set the product name to tofu, where the product ID is 14. If I scroll down here, you can see ID is currently, well, it's already tofu, but okay. But this will allow you to update that data. Okay, That succeeded. And then I can also update the category name using this statement right here, and that succeeds. Now, neither of these statements actually made a change, but it shows how you can update the data within each table at a time. Where you have a problem, though, is if you attempt in a single update statement to update the data from the two different tables. So here, this update statement is attempting to change the product name within the products table and the category name within the categories table. And I'll attempt to execute that, and it says viewer function, product by category, is not updatable because the modification affects multiple base tables. Now, this error message is a little bit misleading because it's not that the view is not updatable, as I demonstrated with the previous two update statements, but it's not updatable in this way by attempting to change data within two or more of the tables that are joined together within the view definition. Now, one way to work around this limitation on updating, inserting into, or deleting from more than a single table using a view is to create an instead of trigger on the view. And that would allow you to create a procedure that runs literally instead of the update, insert, or delete statement, and your procedure can handle the different tables in separate statements.